So I'm really happy to introduce Vladan Joler, who is with us. We are also presenting at the exhibition two works, New Extractivism and the other one with No Scope with Matteo Pasquinelli. They are both like really interesting mind maps of the relation between new technologies, human beings, algorithms, and somehow trying to dig and show what is underneath this immateriality of internet, actually. Vladan is a professor at the University at Novi Sad, and he also working together with Kate Crawford. He's really interested in visualization of data, so I'm sure you will have a chance to notice that during this presentation on new extractivism. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really great pleasure to be here. I think this is my second or third time in Warsaw, and it's always a pleasure. What I'm going to show today is basically some kind of deep dive into this thing that I call new extractivism. And so basically this map, it's a bit different than the ones that you maybe saw from me in the last few years. So what I was doing a lot for the last 5, 6, 7, maybe even more years, it's basically some kind of like investigation, some kind of, I don't know, detective stories and explorations into, let's say, unknown. And this unknown was really, you know, it started like really with the following of one internet packet, and then I wanted to know like what's going on, like what is this little life of one internet packet, and then trying to follow this internet packet into great unknown and to understand all the materiality behind this like one little moment that is happening all the time. And by doing that, we were like going deeper and deeper into different kinds of layers of untransparencies, and it started with one packet, but it ended up with this work that it's called Anatomy of an AI System, into some kind of big map that explains materiality of this planetary scale factory and planetary scale computational system. So it started with something really small and ended up in something that is like say huge. But the thing is, like, more I was like diving into those, because in the beginning I was surrounded a lot by you know, people that have like different kinds of like technical knowledge. So for example, cyber forensics, hackers, and people who are like, we were trying to find the ways how to like technically we can, let's say, get into those black boxes, you know? And extract data out of it and try to see like what's going on there. Because for me that was some kind of like, I was basically trying to understand this kind of invisible factory, you know? So in the beginning I believed a lot in this kind of technical investigations, and I was thinking that I'm some kind of like cyberpunk detective who is like investigating like things. But more and more I was like deeper and deeper, and when I came into that levels of like algorithms and all of those strange things, I understood that you know, I needed much more time to understand the meaning of those maps, the meaning of those drawings than to make them. Because for me, like the main question was like, okay, how this power look like? What is the meaning of that? Like, who have what kind of power is coming from those systems? And in order to give answer to that, I was more shifting from, let's say, technical investigations and legal investigation. I was more shifting into media theory and philosophy in order to understand the picture, you know? And this map that I'm going to show you, that turned somehow into video, and this is my first video for last 20 years, so be gentle I'm not a video maker. It's basically some kind of homage to all of those wonderful, beautiful theories and concepts that I became fan of during my voyage to understand the meaning of those maps and pictures and visualizations I was making. So in a way, this is some kind of homage to that. So I will try now to play this, and then, because I understood at the end it's kind of dense again, so I will stop and try to give you some explanations on those chapters.
Extractivism, an assemblage of concepts and allegories. The word assemblage is usually understood as a collection or gathering of things or people, a machine or object made of pieces fitted together, or a work of art made by grouping together found or unrelated objects. This map and accompanying footnotes are precisely that. One big messy assemblage of different concepts and ideas, assembled into one semi-coherent picture, or let us say a map, a worldview. 1. Gravity. Like Einstein's theory of relativity, massive objects curve the space and time of the topography of the Internet, proportionally to their weight, defined by the number of their users and content. So we can think of massive monopolies and conglomerates such as Google and Facebook as enormous black holes that, with their gravity, create a field so intense that it attracts and swallows the content and users.
So this is the first metaphor, and now we are going to glide from one metaphor and one idea to another one, and it's some kind of linear story out of that. And this idea of gravity, first time I saw that from the artist Louise Drew. She made like a wonderful, I think it's called cartography of the internet or something like this. And this is where I first time saw this idea of gravity, how basically we can think about the internet in these terms of like Einstein theory of relativity and things like this. And this gravity I also saw in some of our investigations. So for example, when we were like doing investigation of like metadata of one Swiss journalist, basically metadata from his browsing history, we saw those gravities. We saw basically how we are browsing. It's always jumping from one black hole to another black hole. It's always like, you know, from Google to Facebook, all of those like big masses of so if you look like a network graph of a browsing history, you will see those masses, you will see those gravities.
2. Forces. Many other potential vectors and social forces contribute to that gravitational force. The fear of social isolation, economic and professional insecurity, unrealistic expectations of efficiency and productivity in the adapt or die environment, tailored addictions, depression and anxieties. These are just some of the other vectors that constitute social forces that keep us, with or without our wish, attached to those platforms.
So, and then I was thinking, okay, because Louise Drew, she's just like saying like number of users defines the gravity. And here I was, because I was like reading some wonderful books also from one person that is also here in this room, Heart-loving, that is called like Sad by Design, no? And I was aware that it's not just about like number of people. Those gravities are also made of other things. So like when we are attached to those platforms, it's different kinds of forces, that are keeping us attached to them. So for example, some of them are like made to be addictive. So basically, and also it's basically the cost of like potential going out from this field of those and forces of those platforms is not just because there is so many people there. It's also because those platforms are becoming part of like larger systems. So it's some kind of integration between like a government systems and those platforms. So for example, I don't know if we speak about how for now several years like US Immigration Service is able to take data from Facebook and analyze your Facebook account. So those systems are starting to be interconnected. So it's not just about numbers. There is so many different vectors that constitute this gravity force.
The social cost of opting out has become so high that opting out is essentially a fantasy. 3. Black holes. Our imaginary hero is swimming against one of those platforms' gravitational force. As they glide towards the singularity defined by the mass of these giants, users and content pass beyond the event horizon, the imaginary boundary in time and space, beyond which there is no return to the outer part of this universe. The event horizon defines the line after which the social and economic price of leaving those platforms is becoming too high. No matter how fast they try to swim now, the stream will pull them towards the center of the black hole. Without even noticing, this story's actor is now falling towards the hole into a new allegory, the cave. 4. Allegory of the cave. What takes place at the bottom of this metaphorical black hole can be described through Plato's allegory of the cave. Plato describes a group of people who spend their entire life chained to cave walls looking at a blank wall. These people are watching the shadows of real objects projected on this wall, giving them names and meanings. In our story, the script and directing of this performance of shadows are entrusted to human algorithmic machines that regulate, filter, censor and moderate the projected content on the walls of the cave.
So now we fell down from this gravity because I was thinking, like, okay, big gravities create this kind of like black holes, and then there is I really like this metaphor of this like invisible line that you cross, that now you're not able anymore to push out. And I heard about other really interesting idea. This is this kind of like velocity speed that you need to have to go out from this gravity mass to escape this, so we can also think about that. And then we fell down into this cave, and so all of you probably know this Plato's allegory of the cave, but then I was thinking, okay, like it's a pandemic time and stuff like this, and we are really in our caves now, so we are watching those projections on our screens, and those projections are really the only way out to see the reality. But so in original Plato's allegory of the cave, there are like some people outside who are playing with some dolls, and then those like images are projected on the wall of the cave, and so on and so on. And then I was trying to play with this idea of the cave and trying to understand the architecture of that cave and trying to understand this projection. So what is this projection? This projection is basically, it's not some people who are playing with that. It's now some kind of like algorithms, some kind of statistical processes who are basically creating this kind of reality show that we are seeing on the wall of our cave.
The existing elements and content that exist outside this cave and horizon of events create an information flow, a theater of shadows. 5. Walls. The cave and tower walls are constructed of multiple opaque layers and built mostly by ghost work or invisible labor. The bricks of this structure are made of black boxes, closed code and hardware, glued together with the invisible network infrastructure. They are covered with layers of corporate secrets, patents and copyrights.
And this is something that I really enjoyed thinking about, because what I was doing for like 5, 6, 7 years, I was like kind of like dissecting those walls. The first wall is trying to understand what is behind the object that you are using. And the second one is to try to understand the network. And then we were like scanning and trace routing network, creating some kind of like images and of those networks. Then after that you realize, okay, it's not about network, it is about networks, but it's also about those data centers. So it's another wall that you need to penetrate. And then after that, it's not about data centers, it's within the data centers you have a server, and then you need to see what is inside of that. And then inside of that you have algorithmic process. So in a way it's like endless layers, endless walls, or layers of those walls that are kind of creating, those are the walls of this cave. Those are the walls that we are not able to see through, because what we are seeing usually it's just an interface and not what's really this kind of extended anatomy of those objects.
6. The interface. Interfaces are framing and structuring the projected algorithmic spectacle of images. Even though they are a direct manifestation of rules, regulations and taxonomies, they successfully obscure what is hidden beneath them. They define directly or indirectly what we can or cannot do. They are both tools and discursive frames. They are instituted as an order of discourse and embodiment of the discipline power of the platform. This cave is not only a prison cell, but it carries out the function of a factory hall and a resource extraction apparatus.
So this is something that, again, this triangle, it's something that I'm following from anatomy of an AI system, but basically this is something that I kind of like continue this kind of, this is a kind of basic Marxist idea of this triangle between the resource, labor, and the product. And in anatomy of an AI system, I try to visualize this flow, this kind of huge fractal supply chain through those triangles, like something is resource, then with labor, transforming into product, and then this product is transformed into resource again, and so on, so on, so on. But here, what was I was kind of like really attached to this idea, and this became like really important to me. It's this kind of like that I'm now seeing some kind of fuzziness of this model, because like if we think about us in this cave, we are in the same time being a resource that is being extracted. We are in the same time being a worker, and we are in the same time being a product. So it's not so easy to follow this triangle, because you can see that we are basically doing like all three functions in the same time. And what is like probably the most funny thing is that we are not aware of that at all. And that idea of trying to understand this kind of new relation of labor and new understanding of like us as a resource, us as a labor, and us as a product, it's something that became like really important to me.
The prisoner performs their threefold function as a worker, a resource, and a product. 7. Shadows and capture agents. The spectacle of a constant flow of information projected through the interface creates a digital shadow on the opposite wall of the cave. The projected digital shadow on the wall is a resource field where thousands of capture agents, tentacles of the rhizomatic surveillance complex, extract information. Every movement or emotional reaction is being recorded continuously. These capture agents can take many forms and sizes. From the tiny pieces of code, crawlers that wander the web, over the sensors catching heartbeats and surveillance cameras capturing our faces, to the complex network of satellites orbiting Earth. They can see our shadows through a full range of the electromagnetic spectrum. They can be invisible or massive, like a 500 meters wide radio telescope. The process of quantification is reaching into the human affective, cognitive and physical worlds. Every segment of our existence reflected on our digital shadows can be seen as a form of direct or indirect labor, producing data as a behavioral surplus. When we breathe, walk, or sleep, every single emotion that we feel, our attention, our body temperature, or diseases that we have, everything can produce a behavioral surplus if being captured by surveillance apparatus. In that sense, even our bare existence within the walls of the cave can be seen as labor. Prisoner workers need to spend more and more hours maintaining their profiles in a similar fashion to sex workers in the windows of red light districts. Digital identity labor is the forced labor of the 21st century. This creates an auto-disciplinary society where each anomaly and misbehavior is detected and quantified.
Okay, so this one is a bit condensed, no? But the main thing is like we are seeing like every few months or few years like some kind of new keywords. Is it like attention economy, emotion economy? lot of different economies. And by thinking about that, you can also understand that it's not so much about new economies, but it's also about new resources. So the idea is, okay, now we have like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of these kind of companies and startups that are basically trying to find a way how to conquer new territories. And new territories, in most of the cases, mean new territories of us, of our bodies, of our minds, of our emotions, and of our organs, of our soul. So it started with, you know, like our location, but now it's more about our emotions, now it's about our dreams, it's about like deeper and deeper excavations of different resources that exist in our body. And in that sense, the kind of new extractivism is going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, penetrating into our body, our minds, our conscious and subconscious. But the main difference is, like, if we follow this idea of like immaterial labor, you know, in the beginning we were like, okay, when we are commenting, doing something on Facebook, liking, whatever, we are basically doing some labor. Now the main question is, we even do not need to do anything. So in this like kind of like world of total surveillance, and this what Shoshana Zuboff will call like surveillance capitalism, you don't need to do anything anymore, because you just need to breathe and exist in order to produce this resource. In that sense, I was like really interested in like trying to explore this somehow.
8. Plutopticon. The gravity of these techno-giants hold billions of users, workers, products at the bottom of those caves. In this assemblage of allegories, millions of caves or prison cells form the unique and invisible Panopticon structure. The central tower of this structure has two main functions: 1, to project the content on the walls of the caves, and 2, to surveil and capture the digital shadows of the prisoners reflected on the opposite wall.
So the only difference here, it's also, so this tower, it's not just about like watching you, it's also about like projecting this kind of like constant reality show. So it's not just one-way function, it's also like have this kind of two-way function in this system.
9. Information retrieval. From each cell cave and through the core of the Panopticon tower, streams of information are flowing into one of the central structures of this image, the data bank. The data bank is not just the engine room, but the power itself. From here, we are examining three processes crucial for this story. On one side, extracted, stored and analyzed personal data is shaping the multidimensional portrait of the individual. On the second, all the products of the user's labor are being stored, analyzed and ranked, to form the information spectacle of images, meanings, and reputations. Furthermore, in the third one, this structure lies upon the top of the exploitation of human minds, bodies and nature. 10. Creation of data body. Our online behavior is captured, processed, and deconstructed into statistical vectors, clusters, patterns and anomalies. Each move we make is carefully analyzed by thousands of mathematical functions, algorithms and machine learning systems. This system does not see us through linear narratives emerging from our browsing behavior, metadata, or movements in physical space, but as n-dimensional statistical projections. Each and every one of our clicks sharpens the resolution and complexity of this abstract and constantly changing statistical portrait or data body.
So we are basically here kind of exploring this idea. Now we are in this data bank, no? And from here you have like two processes. Here on one side you have this, you know, extraction of different types of data that is creating this multidimensional portraits of the individual. And this is something that I was like also interested when we were like doing this Facebook algorithmic factory. It was all about this, like how basically within those like databases and networks, we are seeing creation of this final product that is basically our profiles. But so on one side we have this kind of creation of those profiles. On another side we have, so this is on this right side of this thing, we have creation of this spectacle, creation of this like reality show that we are seeing. And in one moment those two flows are basically joining, because like this, our multidimensional portraits are influencing what we are seeing on that wall. So it's kind of like one flow of things.
11. Individuals. These multidimensional data portraits of the individual, consisting of millions of data points in hundreds of dimensions, can be seen as what Deleuze will name individual. A physically embodied human subject that is endlessly divisible and reducible to data representations via the modern technologies of control. The critical art ensemble is describing this data body as the fascist sibling of the virtual body, a much more highly developed virtual form, and one that exists in complete service to the corporate and police state. 12. Condividuals. Individual is always open to interaction, always ready to be detached from, and attached to, other individuals that share some properties with it, creating collective agents as condividuals, or supersubjects. The mountains and valleys of multidimensional ever-changing invisible algorithmic landscapes are clustering individuals and creating new relations, taxonomies, and ontologies.
So this is something that Matteo Quinelli was kind of insisting on, this idea of condividuals, that we are basically not just individuals in a sense. This is our representation in data, but then we can also think about that we are all the time joined with other people. We are basically clustering and declustering constantly within this kind of like data banks and servers and whatever. And then I really like to think about this kind of like how different kinds of algorithmic landscapes are basically influencing creation of those mixes between, you know, like individuals and condividuals, and thinking about like how, for example, you are constantly being attached or disattached to some kind of clusters, you know, like people that belong to this group and that group and that group. So I really like to think about this as some kind of, you know, algorithmic territories that have their own, you know, relief, and that this relief is basically joining and mixing different individuals and into those kind of groups and clusters.
13. Surveillance Assemblage. The full picture of our individual being is not centralized in one place but is spread across hundreds of data centers in the rhizomatic assemblage of the surveillance economy and government actors. This non-heterogeneous and dispersed assemblage portrait exists through the system of data dealers, the official and unofficial exchange of data, in constant flow forming one functional entity. 14. Content extraction. Each web page or other piece of content that is being captured in the wild is rendered and analyzed. This content is being extracted into hundreds of different signals. Collected content and extracted data become a permanent corporate resource for creating multidimensional, dynamic, complex topologies in which every piece of data becomes an object that is contextually linked to other objects. Within this map, this new meta-territory, crawl hundreds of different mathematical functions, algorithms, and neural networks that we can call instruments of measurement and perception. 15. Instruments of measurement and perception. Those instruments of measurement and perception always come with inbuilt aberrations. The shape of the algorithmic lenses is carefully crafted to project the...
This is something that basically kind of came out from this nooscope and this idea of that Matteo and I had about those seeing artificial AI and those systems as some kind of tools, and then basically not tools but similar to microscope or machine to see data, basically. And this idea of lenses is basically something that was like really important for us. And then here in this metaphor, I'm thinking about this process of like creation of those, like, let's say, this reality show that is basically something that goes through several different algorithmic lenses, and then those like people who are like hanging or moving around those lenses and filters are basically something that we can call bias, and these like people are basically moving and shaping and those lenses according to their own needs.
That is in accordance with the platform's financial interest and political goals and values. Platforms often imply direct rules and regulations. They have direct power of regulation of what can be seen or said, what kind of content can and cannot exist in their universe. Here we are visually representing those rules and regulations as filters. Similarly to the algorithmic lenses, the fabric of those filters is crafted according to the platform's financial interests and political goals and values. 16. Projection of the world. Instruments of measurement and perception are ranking and defining hierarchies and relations between content, users and meaning. They define the digital regime of truth and order. This regime is a prism through which the world is projected in the form of the constant stream of spectacles on the walls of the caves. 17. Engines of extraction. Empowered by the digital extractivism tools of the information age, everything becomes a potential frontier for expansion and extraction. From the depth of DNA code in every single cell of the human organism, to vast frontiers of human emotions, behavior and social relations, to nature as a whole, everything becomes the territory for the new extractivism. At this moment in the 21st century, we see a new form of extractivism that is well underway, one that reaches into the furthest corners of the biosphere and the deepest layers of human cognitive and affective being. 18. Enclosure and affinity to infinity. In the transition to the information age, capitalism was given a chance to satisfy its affinity for infinity, to form and conquer an infinite number of new territories, to create new mechanisms for the accumulation of capital within these new spaces and to formulate new forms of exploitation. Once the territory is invaded, the process of enclosure and exploitation is established. New forms of extractivism are expanding into the territories far behind the biodiversity and knowledge enclosure. This is why we are not speaking anymore just about the knowledge economy but about the attention economy, emotion economy, and many other new economies being born from the invasion of new territories of extraction.
So idea, it's like, we have now this after this kind of like, let's say the expansion into like when this period of expansion and period of like conquering different territories finished, let's say that capitalism needed to expand, constantly expand in order to exist. But now with the digital, in the digital age, the digital age gives to capitalism possibility to expand in many unlimited amount of directions and spaces. And this is this kind of like what we are speaking here about, this kind of process of taking a new territories. And once the territory is invaded, so for example, territory of our dreams or territory of our emotions, once it's taken, the process of enclosure is starting. And after a closure, this space became some kind of like proprietary space that someone owns.
19. Fractal supply chains. Supply chains hidden behind the engines of extractivism are black boxes as much as neural networks or algorithms hidden behind interfaces. Each triangle of this fractal represents one phase in the production process, from birth in a geological process, through life as a consumer product, and ultimately to death in an electronics dump. Within the fractal supply chain, we see a perpetual dance between human labor, non-human labor, earth labor, and automatization. 20. Blood, sweat, and toxic lakes. Every click or swipe we make online creates one little hole in the ground, filled with toxic waste and covered by toxic clouds. Every movement of materials and data within the planetary scale factory has its own hidden price. Supply chains are optimized towards maximizing profit for a few, while the real costs of the destruction that follows are shared among all the living entities on the planet in the present and the future. One molecule after another is extracted by labor and technique to make things for humans, but the waste products don't return so that the cycle can renew itself.
So it's important to understand it's not just about extraction of data, of course. If you look down into those like fractal supply chains and everything, you will understand it's a mix of this kind of old forms of extractivism, new forms of extractivism. So it's starting from like this kind of like exploitation of you know, people in mines and in Congo and so on, so on. So you are, it's a specter of different forms of exploitation. It's not just about this kind of new sexy form of exploitations of data and stuff like this. It's also really
21. Triangular trade. Slavery was at the heart of the development of the modern planetary scale global economy. From those days, the same model of constant flow within the vast fractal production chains expanded in time, space and complexity. The transatlantic slave trade evolved into the contemporary planetary scale factory. 22. Chains of digital colonialism. Traditional colonial practices of control over critical assets, trade routes, natural resources and exploitation of human labor are still deeply embedded in the contemporary supply chains, logistics and assembly lines of digital content, products and infrastructure. In that sense, chains of digital colonialism are made both on the extraction of digital surplus and the traditional exploitation of labor and resources. The concepts presented are mostly represented here visually, in the form of allegories. Dictionaries define allegory as a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. All of these allegories and concepts together, joined in the form of an assemblage, create together a blueprint of a machine-like superstructure, or a super-allegory. In that sense, what we have here is an almost fractal allegorical structure, an allegory, within an allegory, within an allegory.
Okay, you survived. Yay! Thank you. Yeah, it's a bit, there is one joke here, so it has like this kind of starring. So it's all of those like didn't ask any of them. So,
okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So thank you so much for getting deeper into this factory composed of allegories. And thank you so much for your commentaries to this super inspiring video. To be honest, I must say that I really love this drawings and sketches and diagrams, because they make visible things that are hidden and that are made invisible. So it's I think it's important political work also to make them visible and to give them this shape and form. Yeah. But maybe I would like, just because we are also beyond the time, and would like to open the conversation and Janek.
Thank you very much for the talk and for the work. I also enjoyed it a lot. It's one of my favorite works at this exhibition. And the bar is really high because it's an excellent exhibition. There's an obvious critical and political intent that I read in your work. However, on the other side, there is also a very deep fatalism. Like you start with this notion, there's nothing we can do, the gravity forces are too strong, you cannot escape, it's just a fantasy. And I think this fatalism is not political, it's anti-political, it's existential and metaphysical. And you using the metaphor of Plato Cave, which I think it's uber metaphysical, this I think renders, the question I have is how do we resist? Because the message of your work is resistance is futile, it's like Star Trek, you know, capitalism is Borg, it's going to assimilate everything, no point in resisting, so what do we do?
Yeah, eventually I will really need to find the answer to that question, because this is something that I am always asked after this kind of lecture, but somehow I don't know, once, like really long time ago, because I'm coming from Serbia, you know, and then I was like in bus with some friends, she is from Sweden, and then she explained me how people from Serbia are always so negative. And so like, and I was thinking after that, maybe it's true, you know, like maybe it's just like, and I can understand that, maybe it's some kind of like PTSD or something, but I really don't find myself, I don't find that my role in this process is to give an solution. I don't know why, maybe it's some kind of like a neural problem that I have, but I am really not into that. For me, I'm still really excited to try to understand factory and to try to understand how these things works. Maybe one day when I finish this, but probably it will never finish, I will be able to give an answer how we can go out from this. But I don't feel competent in a sense of giving a hint how to get out from the cave. And it's always the question, and I never know how to answer on that. And but it's my, I don't know. I just, yeah.
Thank you, Vlad. I actually literally just finished teaching Anatomy of AI, and I know Kate, in my course called AI and Justice, all the way in UCLA. So I just wanted to, I'm happy to meet you.
Yeah,
and I love this video, and I'm going to show parts of it in my courses, actually. So I had two thoughts, and just want to get your thoughts on them. One is, you know, often in the tech ecosystem, we even see tech magnates like Musk or Jack Dorsey before that at Twitter, and others say transparency, right? With the type of transparency you're showing here is more, it's poetic and it's multimodal, and I don't think it's the type of transparency that they call for, right? And actually transparency is another trap that they use for labor, right? Like Musk just said with Twitter's algorithms, he's going to make it open source, but what that actually means is they're going to get free input from people to refine the algorithm in whatever ways they want. It's not transparency over the actual algorithm, it's transparency so they could get input to create another algorithm or set of algorithms that are not transparent. So often in the justice frame, we talk about governmentality, right? Like Foucault's last lectures, right? Where he talks, and so I think maybe to kind of answer that previous question and ask you, the question could be one about distributed governance and what are the movements needed to push that, right? I mean, I'm in the US, which is neo-fascist. We've just stopped abortion and all sorts of other things. It's insane. So this is just one thought, right? Like, what is the kind of governmentality or a biopolitics kind of idea, right? Those ideas. And then the other thing I thought about a lot is representation here, like Stuart Hall's work, right? So what we're seeing in the Anatomy of AI is representation not like something that existed that we're representing, but we're seeing how AI systems, even the discourse around AI itself, has come to stand in for an absence of people's power or planetary power, right? Yeah. So I'm just curious if you play with those ideas, like representation in relation to extraction and governmentality and biopolitics. So. Yeah, sorry, I go crazy on this stuff.
No, for me, this idea of transparency, it's something that I was like dealing much longer than before Anatomy of an AI System. And I was like really attached to this idea. For me, it was like trying to, as I said, like penetrate all of those layers and trying to understand what's going on behind. But with Anatomy of an AI System, because like this middle of Anatomy of an AI System, it's something that I was like doing for years. And then in one moment, by expanding this, like adding another dimension, and basically that was this idea of geology of media, that maybe we can start from like, you know, elements and metals, and then try to understand this story of the power from another angle, another dimension, that completely put me out from idea of transparency, because I was like, okay, maybe transparency it's not the biggest problem, because like you know, there are like so many different planetary scale issues involved in this. And then when we published this Anatomy of an AI, it became some kind of tool that many people are using in classrooms, in universities, but also in some kind of policy making process. So it's hanging across the toilet in European Commission. That's one of so because they said that they're a big fan of it. So and then for me that one was like really a tool to expand the topic, because like, for example, all about like AI ethics now, it's like concentrated on such a small part of the problem. It's just about data set. It's just about like how this data set is going to be ethical or not ethical. It's just about bias. And then if you take, for example, Anatomy of an AI, you see that this data set is just like one tiny point of this extended anatomy of this system. And if we really want to make an AI ethical, we will need to deal with the planetary scale system and planetary scale system of inequality, of exploitation, and basically we will need completely to deconstruct the way we are living, you know. But the thing is, like, we really often don't want to see, we don't want to see further into those like chains that exist out there, and we want to, and this idea that we can fix AI by making an ethical data set, it's again some kind of techno-utopia narrative that, okay, now if this is like, you know, in the same way how, for example, that I really love, for example, fair phone. I really love that idea of trying to fix phones in a sense of like making them more ethical. But if you go deeper, you will understand that it's basically doesn't reach further than people in the factory in Shenzhen being paid well. And in order to create a really fair phone, you need to create the fair earth. And that's kind of something that we should try to deal. And for me, like all of these things and work, it's basically about trying to zoom in and zoom out. To zoom out like on the most wider scale, and to zoom in also, and to try to understand what is happening on the level of like millisecond or stuff like this, and try to understand this, and yeah. Maybe I didn't, yeah. Thank you.
You need to remix that Eames, I think, Brothers movie, you know, where they zoom out and then go back, and it's amazing they did it without a computer. But I wanted to ask you, said about the view from Serbia. I'm really interested because what you present, and you mentioned planetary, this is quite universal also in the way you present it, right? It's, and I'm really interested whether we have, obviously we have localized experiences, but I wonder whether there is a specific view from Serbia, from Poland, from our region. My general sense is that our region never managed to become I don't know, a subject of digital hype or sexiness, the way I saw at some point, for instance, Brazil managed to have like, and I think still does, for many reasons, like a Brazilian spin on digital activism. You mentioned digital colonialism, the most obvious narratives, for instance, around color and bias, in places like Poland are hard to apply. In Serbia, maybe you have some Roma people, but for our culture, it's almost impossible for us to join this conversation in a meaningful way. So there are some challenges. At the same time, I think we are subjects of data and digital colonialism the same way people in Africa or indigenous people. Maybe not in the same way, okay, but in some way. I'm curious whether there is a view from Serbia that's specific or this is planetary.
Well, I don't see... Again, I think like I'm still not able to understand the main shapes of the factory, and this kind of like how we are different within this factory. It's kind of like you know, the next step maybe, and on this kind of some kind of wider level, I think we have a lot of job to do in order to understand some basics, and then we can start to speak about like these tiny differences. I think like you know, all of those differences are kind of like they are being in any case, you know, like commodified and conquered, and so yeah. But then also like it's also really interesting if you think about this process and also anatomy of an AI system. What we are seeing in the last few years, from COVID now on, we are seeing somehow this planetary scale system of production kind of collapsing. You know, we are seeing some kind of errors in supply chains that are not there. Something's wrong there, and so we are seeing some kind of glitches. But those glitches in this planetary scale system of production and exploitation are basically now being weaponized, and that's also like really interesting. Like how now these supply chains became weapons in a way. Within those supply chains now you have like supply chain wars, and you can think about this like relation between, you know, Taiwan and China and Ukraine and Russia and this kind of like what's going on now with oil and everything. It's basically within the supply chain, so it's kind of like weaponized supply chain, and that's really interesting how we are going to what's going to happen with that.
Okay.
I think here,
yeah, because like we've got a guided tour that
we need to start.
So maybe we can continue this conversation later. I think we'll have some also some lectures and presentations that are in relation to this topic. So my proposal would be that we continue it after the break, and now close the conversation.
But also feel free to ask Vladan questions directly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vladan. Thank you for joining the conversation.